I live between the United States and Mexico. My family has houses in both countries, so I'm always going back and forth. During the week, I cross the border in the morning to study in Texas and return to Mexico at the end of the day. I spend more time in Mexico, which means I've gotten used to certain things that many people would find scary. Here, it's normal to hear about shootouts between cartels and just cancel plans because something is happening on a certain street. I grew up with this, so to be honest, I don't scare easily. But there was one night that was different. My ex-girlfriend lived in a gated community, in a wealthier part of the city. I used to go to her house all the time when we were still together. It was a nice place, very quiet. That night, her parents had traveled and she invited me to stay over. We drank a little, talked, and around 2 in the morning we went out for a walk and to smoke a bit. We went to a basketball court inside the neighborhood behind one of those huge houses. It was a dark place with little lighting. We sat on the benches and started smoking. In the middle of the conversation, I jokingly asked who lived in the big house right behind the court. My girlfriend laughed and said, "Gente de la Maña." Anyone from here knows that Maña is a way of referring to the cartel. I thought she was joking, but then she started telling me that in 2014 the military had shut down the entire neighborhood because they were hunting the guys from that house. When I realized she wasn't kidding, I immediately stopped finding it funny. I got a little pissed and asked what the hell we were doing smoking there so close. She said it was fine, that no one cared about that, but I wasn't comfortable being there. 5 minutes later, a white pickup truck stopped in front of the court. The engine stayed on despite the minutes it had been parked there. I knew right away that wasn't normal. My girlfriend kept insisting it was probably just a couple in the car, but something told me it wasn't. The car just sat there with no one getting out. After a while, I said we should leave. As soon as we stood up, the car sped off. For a moment, I thought it was over, but when we turned the corner to leave, the car showed up again and blocked our path. My girlfriend ran and hid inside a house under construction. She tried to pull me along, but I didn't go. My dad is a cop, and one thing he's always told me is that if you haven't done anything, don't run. She had the weed, I didn't. So I stood still. The driver's window rolled down. There were 2 guys inside, both armed. The driver looked normal, but the passenger had a look that made me shiver. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. His eyes were wide open, his pupils huge, like he was high on something strong. He held his gun on his lap, but his hand was already on the grip, like he was just waiting for an excuse to use it. The driver asked what I was doing there. I said I was just smoking. He asked, "Smoking what?" I answered, "Just cigarettes." He looked at the guy next to him, then back at me. He stayed silent for a few seconds, and I took the chance to say that I didn't know who they were looking for, but it definitely wasn't us. He asked if I was American. I said yes. He told me to prove it. I pulled out my passport and showed it. I always carry it because of the routes I take. He wanted to know about my girlfriend, if she was American too. I said yes, she wasn't. He told me to go get her. I said I'd rather not. Luckily, he didn't insist. He just looked at my phone, checked a few things, and warned me that he didn't want to see us there again. As soon as they left, my girlfriend came out from behind a pile of cement bags, and I signaled for her to run back home. When we got there, I told her to give me the weed so I could throw it away, but she said she had hidden it in the construction site. We ran back, grabbed it, and went straight to her house. I think I've never felt as much fear in my life as in those minutes when we ran to get that back and return home. To this day, what scares me the most isn't even what happened, but the way that guy in the passenger seat looked at me. He never said a word, just stared at me the whole time with his hand on the gun, like he was waiting for the slightest reason to end me right there. Since then, I've never gone near that basketball court again. It was a Friday night, and I was heading to my girlfriend's house, which was about 4 blocks away. It was around 10 p.m., and since the weather was nice, I decided to walk. My city isn't very big, and the neighborhood we live in is quiet, so I never felt afraid to walk around there, even late at night. I put on my headphones and started walking, passing by houses with their lights on and some lawns already dark. The street was pretty empty. Halfway there, I saw a guy standing on the other side of the street, leaning against a pole. He just seemed to be smoking a cigarette, so I didn't pay much attention. I kept walking, checking my phone now and then to see if my girlfriend had texted me. After a few minutes, I looked to the side and realized the guy was gone. I felt a little relieved because, I don't know, he seemed to be staring in my direction before. But then, when I turned the corner onto my girlfriend's street, I saw him a little further ahead, walking slowly, almost in the middle of the sidewalk. That made me stop for a second and think, how did he get there so fast? I hadn't seen him pass me. I did what anyone would do. I pretended not to notice and kept walking. But now I was paying attention. As I got closer, I noticed he kind of slowed down, like he was waiting for me to catch up. I slowed down too. He was wearing a dark hoodie, with the hood covering part of his face, and had his hands stuffed in his pockets. He didn't look drunk or anything, but there was something off about him. When I walked past him, he turned his face toward me really slowly. I acted like I didn't notice and kept going, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw that he turned his whole body toward me. That's when I knew something was wrong. My girlfriend's house was only about 2 blocks away, so I picked up the pace. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't even have to look to know it was him. I thought about running, but in the moment, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe the guy was just heading the same way as me. But then his footsteps sped up to match mine. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a coincidence. I didn't think twice. I suddenly crossed the street without even looking for cars. If it was just a coincidence, he would keep going his own way. But he didn't. He crossed too. Now I knew I was being followed. My heart started pounding. Not out of fear, but because I was already preparing myself to run. And that's exactly what I did. As soon as I passed a parked car, I sprinted toward my girlfriend's house. I heard him start running too. I didn't look back. On the way, I saw an older man stepping out of his house with a dog. Without thinking, I ran straight to him and asked if he knew what time it was. He gave me a weird look, but answered. When I glanced back, the guy in the hoodie had stopped running and was now just walking slowly on the other sidewalk, staring at me. The man with the dog asked if everything was okay. I said yes, and stood there with him for a few seconds, like we knew each other. The guy in the hoodie stood there for a bit, then turned the corner and disappeared. I waited a little longer before leaving. When I finally got to my girlfriend's house, I rang the doorbell 3 times in a row. She answered, laughing, asking why I was in such a rush. I didn't say anything at first, just walked in and locked the door. But later, when we checked the security cameras her dad had installed outside, we saw the guy walking past the house about 10 minutes later, really slowly. I never walked to her house at night again.